Should we talk a little bit about TalkTV and GB News? They're getting investigated. I mean, I'm surprised often actually at the extent of these investigations because Ofcom. I don't. Ava, maybe you can explain this to me. I would have thought that the whole sort of ban on politicians and political parties and there being a clear need to define the difference between news and opinion on TV channels like TalkTV or like GB News, where one of their favourite sticks at the moment is to sort of get like a Boris Johnson era now backbench MP and put them in as a presenter or similar. And far from being inundated with sort of Ofcom investigations and complaints, they're actually pretty few and far between. But 2 have now been opened. Yeah. 1 into GB News and 1 into TalkTV. So tell me what's going on there.
Well, the important thing to remember is that Ofcom only open a complaints issue when there has been a complaint. So someone has to be watching it to then complain about it. And that was a slight on GB News.
Take that!
Only.
Yeah, it's definitely not TalkTV.
You can see Ava on TalkTV most nights.
When's your next appearance?
I'll be on there tonight.
Wonderful.
Holding up the good one. We can
see if we can rush this out before you appear in time for them to see it. Sorry, carry on. Please.
Okay, so that's important. So that first thing, and the second thing is that the parameters of news programming have changed according to Ofcom. So what they're saying is that there's sort of like the break between, or the difference between a straight news program and a current affairs program. The line has now become too blurred, and those rules are under review. But the big issue is that when politicians take on a news program, they've got bulletins in there that are delivered by an impartial newsreader. And what the issue that GB News and TalkTV has strayed into here is that the politician has been delivering the news bulletin. That sounds really mundane and a bit silly, but it basically means that if Jacob Rees-Mogg is crossing live to a reporter or he is breaking news about the SNP, that is a breach of Ofcom because that's when it becomes impartial. The actual bulletin has to be the only point where it's just straight talking. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. Although I'm surprised that these are the things they're being investigated for and not Lee Anderson offering Michelle Dewberry a plate of cat food and a fork.
Sure, but then that's not the Ofcom guidance, right?
That's personal taste.
Okay.
Yeah. No, but it is arguably. And there's this whole, I suppose it's the sanctity of the bulletin, right? So that you can have this huge opinion program in the middle. I mean, LBC have been doing this for years, and I gratefully produced there for years. You worked there as well. The rules are you might have, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, Jacob Rees-Mogg presenting a programme, but you have to have callers that offer an alternate view throughout that programme, and you have to have impartial news bulletins, and GB News is failing to do that.
Does their business model just not work then? Does it just not comply with Ofcom?
If I'm going to be a little bitch, it's...
No.
I would argue that it's probably producers who don't understand that.
Ooh.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
I mean, I think their business models are horseshit, to be honest with you. A lot of talk was made of sort of for GB News and also TalkTV about them being startups. And I think if you were actually running them as a startup, you take a look at the business and you go, right, we have this super expensive television channel that very few people watch. It costs us a huge amount of money to be on the air. And then over here on this side, we have actually a relatively successful digital side to the business, whether it's Nigel Farage, whether it's Piers Morgan, whoever.
Neil Oliver.
Of course, my guy.
Does numbers.
He does numbies. He does sweet numbies. But you've got this successful side of the business, which actually is relatively low cost. Obviously, there's presenter talent, and you're running a studio, etc. But if you're a startup, you would look at that and you go, well, we killed the TV side of things, and we just go digital only, and that's where we're getting all of our viewership. That's where we're making advertising revenue. Let's pursue that, and they don't do that. So that says to me, okay, this isn't actually intended to be a successful business enterprise, a startup. This is an effort to gain influence. It's to set the tone of the conversation. To for example, I think GB News, they're part of the broadcast pool. They interview cabinet ministers. They interview the Prime Minister. They secure big interviews. I think the first interview on GB News was Andrew Neil and Rishi Sunak when he was then Chancellor rather than Prime Minister.
And how much is it to be in that pool?
A lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah, hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. So I don't think you can look at them and say, oh, this is a business enterprise, because it costs a lot of money. I think GB News is rocking a pretty hard loss.
It is, yeah.
Last time I looked at it. So,
and you're totally right, and the main evidence for that is that if you were to take it digital only, you wouldn't be bound by Ofcom anymore. And Ofcom,
hell yeah, brother.
And Ofcom have this very tricky kind of legislation, which basically means if you're going to broadcast nationally, you have to have regional outposts, which is really expensive to have reporters up and down the country and to make sure you're covering all of those regions in your bulletin. Like, it's not as simple as just kind of like turning up one day, getting a fancy studio and then going around, we are delivering the news.
This is us now. This is GB, all of it here.
Yeah, that's why we're online only, because you won't catch us in Scunthorpe.
Wow. Ed, any further thoughts on Talk TV, GB News? I mean,
I just always wonder who see the kind of the mid Talk TV and GB News presenters, like not the nutters and not like the household names.
Daytime.
Like daytime. Like, I just want to know who watches that. Like, does anyone love that? Is that anyone's favourite show? I think it's really interesting. Like, you know, like, I don't know, you'd watch literally anything else at any other time.
I'll tell one story about GB News, because I was sort of, before they launched, I was being lined up as a sort of contributor. And I did do one live appearance, but something that wasn't broadcast was I went on. It was, Michelle Dewberry has a show and she's not being offered cat food by Lee Anderson, and it's like a left-wing person and a right-wing person, and they talk about issues of the day. And one of the stories they wanted to talk about was something to do with a guy in Rochdale who I think he was British Pakistani, and they're saying, he's committed a sex crime. Should we deport him back to Pakistan?
Right.
Strapline on the bottom of the screen says Rochdale child rapist, and it's just a shot of me. It's just me labelled Rochdale child rapist. My friend who was working, because it wasn't being broadcast. It wasn't being broadcast, but it was like as if it was. So it was running in the newsroom, and my friend who was working at the time took a photo of it and WhatsApped it to me.
I love them like going through the notes afterwards of like what went wrong, and it was like, oh yeah, outing panelists.
Yeah, incorrectly labelling panelists. So yeah, I did it.
Contempt of court.
I did it. Yeah, well, the charges have not been proven.
Again, though, would people? Because it's like some of the assistant producers that I worked with went on to become GB News presenters, and I remember one specifically that I very politely let go because twice she put on people who were either in a jury or one was the mother of someone who'd been murdered and it had just gone to trial. And I was like, yeah, so basically, like this is not allowed. This is really not allowed.
They offer such inflated salaries as well, which is why a lot of people go to GB News.
They do.
I think someone's like I know someone who was on 40k as a digital producer, not like a head of anything, but they need to make it sweet to stick around.
Some producers on 70k.
70k
Producer.
Absolutely extraordinary.
Imagine earning that little. Couldn't be me.
Any more on Talk TV and GB News?
If you're hiring,
please email ed@joe.co.uk. Cool. Okay. Well, let's
6-figure offers only.